good people of the Grove. Exodus chapters 35 and 36. In growth group time, I pray that your time has been good this year in Exodus. It is wrapping up. And as it wraps, what you're going to find is what you're reading begins to start to be a bit repetitive. And I'll tell you, it can be a bit of a chore to get through the things that the Bible repeats again and again. I mean, I'll give you an example. This is, I think, the fourth time that God has given the Sabbath regulations in the book of Exodus. And you kind of have to ask yourself why. Not only, it would be easy for God to record it one time to Moses, and then Moses comes down the mountain and tells the people of Israel, and it just says, and he told all the people of Israel exactly what he has just received. It would be easy, but I think there's a reason why God records it, number one, and this is, if you don't know this isn't the same things being said over and over again. The setting is different. What we read before in Exodus 25 through 30 was God giving these regulations, giving these thoughts to Moses up on the mountain. If you remember, that whole idea and that system got interrupted by the golden calf and the judgments that came after that. And then Moses had to go back up on the mountain, receive those instructions almost again with the new tablets and everything else, come back down. And so there's been a bit of a delay. And what we know is that God's people's hearts wander. And so in their wandering, God is repeating what he wants done, exactly how he wants done. And so it's not just repetition for repetition's sake. The setting is different. God first now speaking to Moses on the mountain, Moses now coming down the mountain and now giving these instructions to the people of Israel. For us now, centuries later, millennia later, we're reading both conversations and it feels repetitive, but I can assure you it was not for them. And I can also assure you for us, we need the same faithful word again and again and again and again, and God is faithful to deliver it. So let me just jump right into the structures for this week, and hopefully we'll have a shorter video than 20 minutes. Wouldn't that be a miracle? But here's where we are. What does this say about God, right? Again, that's where we're going to start. What does this passage reveal about the character of God? I think there's a few things. One, I've hit on this already. He is relentless in his standards and in his plan. He gives the law to Moses. He gives the standards to Moses. He gives the vision for the tabernacle and everything to Moses on the mountain. Quickly realizes the people are not yet up to snuff to these regulations and standards. They rebel. They create the golden calf. All that happens there. And yet he is not going to bend on what he expects of them, particularly around the Sabbath. He's about to put them to work. And there's no greater work than building God's temple or tabernacle. And so the people could have easily said, well, surely he wants us to finish. Surely he cares about his place. But not more than he cares about his people. And he wants them to rest and model and to follow after his model of rest. And so it's really beautiful that God would continue to be relentless in his standard and in his plan. It's not just rote repetition. God knows we need the repetitive, faithful instruction from him again and again. So that's the first thing I think it reveals. He is relentless in his standard. He's also then relentless for his provision for his standard. I think that's the second thing this passage reveals. What do I mean by that? God creates all kinds of people. There's a Moses, there's an Aaron. Those are the people that get all the credibility, or all the face time, so to speak, all the airtime in the book of Exodus, but not at the end. At the end, you see God really turning the page and saying, I don't need spokespeople for this. I need craftsmen and craftswomen for this. And he's relentless in his provision for a different kind of leader, for a different kind of work, from Bezalel and Aholiab. I love that he also then includes a very specific instruction and description that the women were also included in this building of the tabernacle. That's a very rare thing in any ancient Near Eastern text, but specifically of Exodus as well. This is, I think, one of the only times that the women are included in this particular type of work. Usually it's just like the men were judging. In Exodus 18, he got all the men that were elders of the people. But right here, aside from Moses' sister, we don't really hear a lot about women, but right here, they're included. I think that's really beautiful. He doesn't just create the Moseses and the Aarons of the world, but also the Bezalels and the Aholiabs of the world. One is not more important than the other. In fact, God uses all sorts of people to accomplish different tasks. It's not just speaking and being his mouthpiece, but also his hands and his feet, creating the handiwork that he would have on the earth, particularly with the tabernacle here. So I think that's really cool. And then finally, this reveals about God, and this is poignant for me because I had an interaction at a beach house where the people were basically saying, yeah, if God, pays my bills, and I'll give back to him. And I was like, he actually does pay your bills. He actually gave you your mind. That's pretty ingenious. And they were not having that. But here it is in Exodus 36, verse 2. The Lord had put skill and intelligence into those who were doing the work on the tabernacle. What a beautiful gift that God would give us a right mind, give us the skill set that we have. So whatever skill set you have, it's given to you by God. And so therefore, he wants us to give back to him. And that, I think, is where we can transition into not just what it reveals about God, but what this reveals about us. We are prone, this goes along with the first point about his relentless pursuit of his people and being faithful to repeat himself again and again. We are prone to not only forget, but we abandoned the old ways for new ways. We must not give in to this. We are prone to give in to a Gnostic heresy. If you've never heard of the Gnostics, they came around in the New Testament. They came around especially in the formation of the early church. And they came and they would weasel their way into the early church. And what they would say is, hey, really cool about you know things about Jesus, but I have a new knowledge. Gnostic, gnosis is the Greek word for knowledge. I have a new knowledge that I will give to you, and it's going to blow your socks off. Just come with me to our secret meeting. And we can't tell it to everybody, but we'll give you this secret knowledge if you come to our meeting, give our dues here, etc., etc. It's attractive because we get bored with the ancient ways. We think, ooh, there's new knowledge, there's new things, there's new ways to do this. And this is like the subject of most podcasts and bad YouTube channels, is that there's new ways to discover and following Jesus. There's not. There's nothing new under the sun. What it is a hook at our heart to abandon the old ways because they're a little bit boring or we've grown too familiar with them. Instead of going deeper into those familiar ways, we just count them as not relevant anymore. Man, that's dangerous in all of us. And I think we have a wandering heart to go after some new Gnostic knowledge, new faith, new teachings that maybe only a few people know about. It's nonsense. It's basically the conspiracy theory culture all over again. And I think that's why we're so prone to that kind of thing. It's because we want something new, something more attractive, something deeper to really pull at our hearts. And really, it's the ancient ways that hold the paths to life. We'll get to that in a moment. But all of us are prone to wander. I think the other thing that I think this passage helps us to really dig into about our hearts. If you'll notice, all throughout this passage, there is a repetitive statement about our hearts. And I'm just wondering, it reveals an option on whether or not our hearts are going to be stirred by the Lord. And I think this goes hand in hand with abandoning the ancient ways. We want to abandon the ancient ways because we find them not attractive anymore. But I think if we go back to the ancient ways, we'll find them to be more attractive, more helpful, more practical than ever. And as we do, our hearts will be stirred so that we can put our hands to work. Here's what I mean. Check this out. Exodus chapter 35, verse 4. Take from among you a contribution to the Lord. Whoever is of a generous heart. You see the heart being involved here. Exodus 35, verse 21. And they came, everyone whose heart was stirred in him, everyone whose spirit moved in him, brought the Lord's contribution to be used for the tent of meeting. We go on in verse 22. All who are of willing heart brought brooches and all sorts of jewelry to be used for the gold inlays. Verse 36. All the women, again, whose hearts stirred them. Again in verse 29, all the men and women, the people of Israel, whose hearts moved them to bring anything for the work of the Lord, had commanded by Moses to be done, to be brought as a free will offering to the Lord. Is your heart stirred? If not, you will not be generous. And if you are generous, it is most likely because God has stirred your heart. If you find that your life is not generous, both in forgiving someone else and in giving generosity to the house of the Lord, you might need to go back and rediscover why your heart maybe is not being stirred unto the Lord, because those two things are clearly cause and effect. The Lord stirs the heart, and God's people are generous to no end. God doesn't stir the heart, and there's no generosity. So I'll go back to the tithe. I'll go back again to the generous desire that God wants us to live in. Faithful, generous, probably more than 10%, probably upwards of, you look at the temple tax and all of that, you're looking at 20-something% for the Old Testament Jews. That's beyond our comprehension, because I know that the average American Christian gives 2.5% of their income. And it doesn't increase. It's just 2.5. And if that's a generous heart, okay. But maybe we need to go back and see if our hearts are being stirred and rediscover what that really looks like. So that leads us again, what must I do? All right. Well, first, I think you've heard me say this, but I think staying the course is really important. Don't give in to a Gnostic faith. Here's what Jeremiah 6 says. Thus says the Lord, stand by the roads and look and ask for the ancient paths where the good way is, and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls. Just hear that. It's the ancient ways. Proverbs 22:28 says, do not move the ancient landmark that your fathers have set. They've set the ancient ways. Don't get bored with them. Rediscover how beautiful and good they are. 2, what does your generosity look like? Can I just be really candid with you? The last couple of weeks at the Grove have not been great with giving. We're fine as far as a budget is concerned. God's been faithful to us. We usually spend less than what we think we're going to spend. But what would it look like for us to be a people, especially as we look to land and our own tabernacle to be built into the future, which is going to be way more money than what we can afford? But listen, have you read Exodus chapter, I think it was 36, verses 5 through 8? Like, what would it look like for us to be so generous in our offerings back to the Lord, specifically at the Grove, that this would be our reality? Check out Exodus 36, 5 through 8. I'll read it here. Look, they came to Moses and they said, the people bring much more than enough for doing the work that the Lord has commanded us to do. We have more than enough to build and to acquire land and to do all the things that they're doing here in Exodus, much less in Richmond. So Moses gave the command, and this would be my faithful charge. Don't just keep bringing it in. No. So Moses gave the command, and word was proclaimed throughout the camp, let no man or woman do anything more for the contribution for the sanctuary. So the people were restrained from bringing, for the material they had was sufficient to do all the work and more. What would it look like to be a part of a church, or that the church itself wouldn't beg, borrow, and sometimes steal at the end of the year to kind of get their budget and make up for their budget shortfall, but instead that they would be able to go, we have more than enough, we're not going to take any more, and what a beautiful thing in reality that would be. That actually has been our history in the past. Last year we met our budget at the end of October, and we said, hey, if you want to give towards the building fund, towards church planting, which we're sending out, and much other things, how much beauty would it be to give more and above? And I pray that we would be able to do the same thing this year. But we'll see. We got to meet our budget first. But what would it look like for a church to have so much they wouldn't need to keep taking in funds towards the end of any budget year? What a beautiful thing it is. All right, finally, because we're running long again. Just as Bezalel and Aholiab were specifically gifted for every work of craft, I think it's important that we build on what we learned over the summer with our spiritual gifts to actually put them into work. Are you putting those gifts into work somewhere? Or have you just accumulated new knowledge about who you are and not actually risked something to put those new gifts into work? I did a sermon on Bezalel back in 2017 that I'm going to post in the comments in this video. I would encourage you to listen to that. I may also encourage you to go back to the summer sermon series on spiritual gifts to listen to those. But more than anything, discover, but also deploy. Don't just discover and sit, but deploy those gifts for the good of God's people and the building up of his body. I love you, and I'll see you soon.